Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today we're doing something a little different. We are going to be talking to Michael, his last name is Wamback, for those of you that don't know, about Freemasonry, because Michael has been a member of this lodge, Sunset Lodge number 369, for almost 2 decades, I think over 2 decades. So he's going to be interviewed and we're going to talk about Freemasonry and his own journey with Freemasonry. And I'm going to give a little brief bio right before. But first, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and welcome again to our broadcast. We're really happy and excited to have you guys here. And if I don't look at the camera when I'm being interviewed today, it's because I'm running cameras and mics and sound and everything else. So just, not trying to be shy, just kind of busy. We have some great shows coming up, but the one I really want to talk about is actually a special coming up this Sunday, the 16th. We're going to have our first 2-hour paranormal special. We're going to have Mystic Mitten Paranormal and Craig Owens and Holly Lindblom and Jeff Mandel, and we're going to have a nice round table. We're going to talk about all things haunting, and it should be a lot of fun, so we're actually really, really excited about that. You can get all the information on our show at our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. And while you're there, if you can afford to, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. It really does help us a little bit with our production costs. And if you can't afford it, we love having you anyway. And this is definitely a passion project for us. And we're having a lot of fun doing the show and meeting everybody, all these new people that we're making friends with. And also you can subscribe to our newsletter. And one of the best things you can do to help the show is just to click subscribe on YouTube. It really does help us to build our subscriber base. And YouTube seems to like that. So anytime you click on it to like or subscribe, it really makes a difference. So I'm not going to keep us too long because I know there's a lot to cover in this topic. So I'm going to kick it back to you. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thanks, Michael. And I'm going to give a little brief bio of his Freemasonry journey. As I said, he joined over 2 decades ago. In 2005, Michael served as master of Sunset Lodge, and it was the year of the lodge's centennial, so it was a really special occasion on top of it. He's received the 32nd degree in the Scottish Rite and the Royal Arch degree, and he is a recipient of the Hiram Award, which is bestowed on members for outstanding service to their lodge. Currently, he is the Sunset Lodge secretary and the officer's coach. He's I've of course been through this journey on the side with him for the whole time, and he's a real mix of sort of down-to-earth, hardworking, Masonic member, as well as really interested in the philosophy and the esoteric side. So I think he has a real good balance of what Masonry can do for men and women. So that's his bio, but let's just get started. One other practical thing before we get started. Michael is usually the one chatting, so I'm going to watch the chat and see if there are any questions you have for Michael. So please ask your questions, but we won't be able to chat as freely as we normally do because he's being interviewed and also running everything. So okay, let's get going. So Michael, why don't you share with us how you got interested in Masonry?
Well, actually, it was kind of an accident, believe it or not, that I was a history buff. So, especially Elizabethan, Victorian history, English history. So it was pretty hard not to run across it because Freemasonry was a very driving force in a lot of that time period and shaping the world, really, in many respects, especially with the British military. So I was very familiar with it from history. And then I'm sitting at home one day and a friend of mine, Josh, says, "What are you doing on Tuesday nights?" And I'm like, "Well, nothing much." And he said, "Well, do you want to join a Masonic lodge?" And I thought, okay, let's do it. So we met with the guy that was sponsoring us, and my friend was really into all the philosophy and everything else. And so he had a million questions, and I'm just sitting there very quietly. And every once in a while, the guy would look at me and say, "Do you have any questions?" And I would say, "No, I'm fine." Because I figured, if I don't like it, I'll quit. And, I don't know what I'm getting myself totally into, but I'm sure it's fine, and we'll just go from there. And so I think that he thought that they all thought Josh was going to be the protege and the next big thing in Masonry, and I was just going to show up and maybe pay my dues and probably not contribute much. And within 2 years, my friend had sort of dropped out of the lodge, and I was elected master of this lodge. So it goes to show you just never judge a book by its cover, So I think that that's all. It was very funny. And it was an honor to be elected to the master of the lodge, too, especially for the centennial, which was a really terrific thing. And we can certainly get into, if you like, some of the structure and how Freemasonry works.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Let's talk a little bit about maybe some basic history of Freemasonry, too, for people that have no knowledge of it. So whatever you'd like to share about that.
Sure, absolutely. The earliest recorded documents for Freemasonry goes back to about the 1400s in Scotland or Edinburgh. The oldest lodge is in Scotland, Lodge Kilwinning number 0. And I always think it's fascinating from an esoteric point of view that they started with the number 0 instead of the number 1 when they had their first lodge open. In the beginning, it was a very unregulated sort of a thing. Every lodge was its own entity, and they all did things kind of differently and so forth. There was really no parent umbrella organization. In the early 1700s in London, 4 different lodges got together, and they actually formed the first Grand Lodge, the Grand Lodge of England. And that actually started what I guess we can call the modern Masonry, which became, again, more organized. Every country is still unique in the sense that it doesn't have a global pope or figurehead. Each country has its own Grand Master, who's the authority over Masons in that particular country. Everybody is democratically elected, from the Grand Master to the Master of the Lodge, in my case, in 2005. And they generally just serve a term of 1 year. In some countries, it may be 2 to 4 years, but for the majority of the world, it's just 1 year. And then they're done and they're replaced by somebody else. And you sort of become an elder in the sense, as a past master would be my title. So hopefully the new officers and masters will consult you from time to time to share your wisdom that you gleaned along the way. But there really is no overall, global figurehead or controlling entity to Freemasonry. It's still a very broken up sort of a cellular structure to it.
And it's also, states have different authority, right? Each state has in the United States have their own Grand Lodge. Is that correct?
Yeah, each state in the U.S., because it's a huge country, and in the case of like England or Italy, there'd be just the one Grand Lodge for the entire country. And then the Grand Lodges share recognition, what we call it. So we recognize, the different Grand Lodges in the United States or England or France, that there is a certain underlying set of values that lodges have to have. So, for example, in our Freemasonry, we don't admit someone who's a professed atheist, and that's a tradition that goes back, again, hundreds and hundreds of years. So if a lodge violated that in some way, one of those principles, then the other lodges would withdraw recognition, meaning that we can't visit them and they can't visit us if they come. Currently, actually, the Grand Lodge of California does not have recognition with the Grand Lodge of Tennessee, I believe. So if I go to there, I can't visit their lodge, and if they come here, they can't visit ours. And the reason for that was that at their Grand Lodge a few years ago, they passed a law basically forbidding gay people from becoming Masons, and our Grand Lodge felt that that was inappropriate, and so they withdrew recognition. So until they, as did most of the country, so until they change that law or get rid of it, we're not allowed to visit lodges there. So that's kind of how you end up with a little bit of a global agreement, I guess, within the organization.
Now, one of the benefits of being a Mason is that you can visit other lodges, and when you travel, that can be very helpful. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much everywhere in the world. The only place you really don't find it are very totalitarian countries, because it does tend to, first of all, they just don't like people gathering for the most part, so that always becomes an issue. And then sort of the tenets of Freemasonry is sort of, separation of church and state, and very much, an emphasis on democratic values. So because of that, totalitarian countries are generally not very fond of it. We'll tend to shut it down. But the vast majority of the world, there are Masonic lodges. And every year we get a book that's, like a little telephone book with every lodge listed in the world in fine print that we're allowed to visit. So, and our Grand Lodge puts that out annually. So there's literally thousands and thousands of them in every different country, really.
So when you joined the lodge, now in California, in our area, there's actually more than one lodge that's fairly convenient in terms of getting to. that you could join. In fact, you can join more than one. But why did you settle into the Sunset Lodge at the time when you decided to pick a lodge?
Well, I thought that this lodge had a lot going for it. It had a good history. It was here, we're coming up on our centennial, our 100 years. And they were just a nice bunch of guys, Now, when I did join, the lodge was, almost getting ready to close its doors. There were 3 or 4 guys just keeping it going, Murray Cook and John Barry and Augie and Robbie. And so it was in tough straits. And then another good friend of mine, brother Clifton Aduddle, and myself joined. And fortunately, we had a photographic memory between the two of us. So we were able to memorize all the different ritual for all the different positions, and we were able to kind of keep the lodge going. And then we implemented a bunch of new programs, emphasis more on the philosophy and the esoteric stuff, which drew some of the younger guys. And so we were able successfully to get this lodge back on its feet, which I think is a great thing. And the other thing that's really cool about our lodge from an esoteric point of view, whenever a lodge forms, it's given a number by the Grand Lodge. And that number is sequential. So it's not random. If a lodge closes or consolidates with another lodge, it surrenders its number, and that number gets retired, so it can never be used again. So we are literally the only lodge in California that will ever have the number 369. And of course, mystically, Tesla spent years researching that number, and he said if you understood the mysteries of 369, you would understand the mysteries of the universe. So I always thought it was really cool that our lodge has the number 369, and we have sort of tried to create a little more emphasis on some of the esoteric aspects of Freemasonry in our lodge as well, and it's definitely very rich in all that symbolism.
Well, yeah, it even adds up to a 9, doesn't it? 369 when you add it up. So we'll have to do a show on that. I forgot about the Tesla angle. That's really amazing. So you joined this lodge, and then you very quickly got in line to become the master. Now, I know some of it was a necessity, but let's talk about what that means and what it also requires, because not everyone will be a master of a lodge for a variety of reasons.
Sure. Actually, the ratio, they say, is about 20%. So about 1 of every 5 people that joins will become master of the lodge. It takes, and it is Masons are Masons, so wherever I travel around the world, a brother is a brother. And in that sense, there's no real distinction. But certainly serving as a master of a Blue Lodge, you do have that certain extra sense of respect, I guess, when you travel abroad, because people understand that puts you in that sort of slightly more elite group. And one of the big stumbling points for a lot of people is that we have 3 different initiation rituals. They're fairly significant in length. And all of the ritual work has to be committed to memory. We're not allowed to read it off a card or even have a book open in the lodge. It has to be all recited from memory. And if I had to do all of the degrees from beginning to end and just sit here and recite them, it would probably take me about 2.5 hours to get through all of it. So the memory work alone is a bar for some people who just really would struggle with memorization. And then beyond that, obviously, the governance of the lodge, you have to have the confidence of your brothers that you'll be a good master and be able to handle disputes if it arises in the lodge with members, and make, wise decisions for the lodge and so forth. So they're going to look at your character as well. And then, of course, the time commitment, because, again, it really does take time. You have to really invest your time into the lodge if you really want to do it right. And for the guy that, sponsored us in Masonry, he said, it really, if you're going to go through, it takes 3 things. It takes the desire, the time, and the ability. And he said, and you can't be missing one of the 3. You have to have all 3. And so for that reason, it's about 1 in 5 that will actually ever be master of a lodge.
I have a couple of stories to share about Michael's ability to memorize. The first is when you receive these little blue books, and everything's also, he forgot to mention, it's written in a cipher, so that it's kind of a code. And from the very beginning, Michael shared with me that he could read the code without having been trained. So I always thought that was a possible past life thing for Michael. And then Michael became really quite renowned for his ritual work. And I'd like you to share, however, what you were taught about ritual being different from acting.
Yeah, ritual is very different from acting. There are 3 degrees, as I said, and when you go through it, you're not really supposed to over-dramatize it. It's delivered more as a lecture, or there's a certain dignity and so forth. But you don't really see it as a play in the sense you're not embellishing and doing a lot of gesture and so forth, with the exception of the 3rd degree. And the second part of the 3rd degree is actually a play. So that one is done, very theatrically. But for the most part, And again, the person that sponsored us was an actor himself, and he drilled into me right at the beginning. It's not acting; it's ritual. There's a difference, and there really is a difference, and it should be delivered, as I said, in a dignified manner, but not in an overly embellished theatrical manner. If you really want to do it properly.
So one of the things I observed, and I've observed this with, I come and participate in events at the lodge that are for everyone. But one of the things I've observed is that almost everyone that takes the degrees has some kind of real experience. Even though I don't know what it is myself, I can see that something is happening. So talk to people a little bit what you can about what it was like going through the different rituals and how it affected you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I noticed, which is really interesting, especially with the first degree when the person has their first initiation, and I do think that there is a shift of consciousness that occurs with it. I think there is a very mystical aspect to the lodge itself and the ritual, and even magical to a degree, or occult in many ways. And one of the things I actually noticed when a lot of people get their first degree is that at some point after the first degree, in the relatively near future after that, they in some way have to start dealing with a lot of their crap that they've been putting off and so forth. So often there's a calamity of some sort. It's almost like a purification or purging that goes on. And I've seen that happen over and over with people where the stuff that they've been avoiding dealing with and so forth, they suddenly get thrust into and have to kind of clean their lives up a little bit, if you will. And again, that just seems to be a pattern for some reason. The other thing that's really cool about the lodges is that we, of course, have a lot of members, and a member will pass away. And it strikes me, our average age in the U.S. is around 76 or so. And yet every time, without us, very rarely is there somebody young. A lot of the times they're in their 90s, 100s, late 80s. And so maybe there's something about the camaraderie, the fellowship, the sense of purpose that I think is maybe important in life to sustaining life. So it's really quite remarkable when you see that over and over and over. So there's something magical about it, for sure.
The other thing I find really interesting about Masonry is it embraces pretty much all religions. And you also, politically, you're not supposed to really sort of share your politics in the lodge itself, so that you end up getting to know people you might not know because of their different views in life.
Well, that's actually a very big part of the Masonic philosophy, for sure. And every lodge has its own, every Grand Lodge has its own bylaws, the California Masonic Code, in our particular case it's called. And the only two subjects forbidden to be discussed in an actual lodge meeting are religion and politics. So the Grand Lodge and the members of each individual lodge are not supposed to take a position on religion and politics. And for the simple fact that we're here to do good work and to support one another and bring people together. And tolerance is a very big part of the actual philosophy of the ritual. So yes, in our lodge, I have people who are Hindus and Buddhists and Christians and Muslims and Jewish people and pagans, and me that just kind of believes in something but doesn't quite know what it is. And yet we can all sit down and break bread together and converse with one another and support one another. And I think maybe our society really needs more of that, where people are coming together of different faiths and different political views and setting all of that stuff aside to really find the common good. And I think maybe in our country, in particular in the U.S., I think with all the fracturing that's going on and the infighting, the different camps being at war with each other, that it's something that's maybe sorely needed in our society right now, for sure.
I think so, because once you start to get to know a person that embraces a philosophy, it's really different than when they're an abstract. You get to know the real person and you can see who they are. And so I agree with you. It's one of the things I really like about Masonry. It seems to be fairly unique. I don't know if there's any other large organization. The other thing that it seems really good at is charity work, Masonry. So talk a little bit about the charity work of the Masons.
Yeah, I think Masonry as a whole, it's people say, what is it? And to boil it down as simply as possible, I've often said, to me, it's applied spirituality. So it's about taking the concepts of what it is to be a moral person, a good person, but then putting it into practice, taking it into your community and doing some good with it, not just for the sake of your own enlightenment. So yes, Masonry has always had a charitable aspect associated with it. And historically, again, you can trace that back to some of the early roots of the Grand Lodge of England and some of the things that were going on in that society with, I think, box clubs they were called, which are very charitable organizations that sort of had a little influence on the beginning of Freemasonry. But in the Blue Lodge, which we have in California, the first 3 degrees, our principal charity, aside from just other community work we do, is taking care of our own. So we have retirement communities we support for our members as they get older. We provide relief if someone becomes destitute and do what we can to help them get back on their feet and so forth. So we're very focused on that. But the Shrine has their children's hospitals. The Scottish Rite has centers that they operate for kids that have speech impediments and disabilities. There are just many other charitable organizations, and I was reading somewhere that in terms of a global thing, anonymously Freemasonry donates about $2.5 million a day to charity. So it definitely does a lot of good work for sure.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know it was that much. So, in your own mind, what do you think is the most important thing if you join Masonry, or not maybe the most important thing, but what do you consider to be a Masonic person once they join a lodge, not because they're an officer or because they have, the 32nd degrees, but what is it that you think constitutes a Masonic person?
Well, I think it's as simple as saying that they're a good person, someone who has good moral character, that is trying to do good to their family and neighbors and community, I think is highly important. I think that there's a lot of differences. I mean, some members are very esoteric and they're really fascinated by all the esoteric aspect of the ritual, which has a lot of Kabbalistic and Hermetic elements in it. And I was saying to Krista, we need to get Lon Duquette, who's also a Mason, to come on and talk about some of the Hermetic and Kabbalistic aspect of the Masonic ritual, because he's so versed in all of that stuff. So that might be a show for down the road. But again, some people just like to show up and just have the fellowship and the camaraderie. But I also think that belonging to something where there is that support system in our society it's really crucial. And just to give you, Krista and I are kind of paycheck to paycheck kind of people. We've always kind of been that way. And I can sit next to somebody in my lodge who's a multi-millionaire, and we're brothers. We just treat each other equally, and we're just brothers at that point. It's not about the material world or the material things. But I was ill and I had to be in the hospital overnight. And of course, the bill the next morning was like $1,200 or something from a night's stay or whatever it was. And I was checking out, and at that point, it was prior to the Affordable Care Act, so we had no health insurance. We couldn't afford it. And so we're heading down to the to the accounting place to try and create a payment plan or something to pay off this debt. And so we got there as part of the checkout, and the woman looked at it and she said, well, you don't owe anything. Your lodge was here and paid everything. So they'd actually taken up a collection in our lodge, and they came to the hospital, and they knew that we couldn't afford it. So they, without us asking, they actually paid my hospital bill. So I was taken care of. And I think that's pretty rare in our society these days, sadly, where you see those kind of individuals or organizations that just go to that level to kind of support one another. So that's one of the great benefits. And we could hear the rest of the show talking about different stories I know where that's happened. But they take that seriously, and that obligation to help each other seriously. And I've seen lodges and individuals just go above and beyond to do that. And to me, again, that's pretty fascinating. But then there's also the esoteric aspect and all the ritual and all the cool knowledge that you can gain from that. So there's just many layers to the whole thing. And I think they're all incredible.
I'm sure it's the esoteric side and it's really great symbolism that really draws in the public and causes them to wonder what Masonry is, and is it really a secret society? Or and the other thing I have noticed too is when people visit the lodge room for the first time, which you can do, a lot of lodges will have it open for public, is they love to sit in the master's chair. Everybody loves it. They want to take their picture. And I mean, it's a nice chair, but it's not that nice. And there's something about it that seems very archetypal, some of the imagery and but maybe let's talk a little bit about more why the public is so enamored by that kind of supposedly secret esoteric side of Masonry.
Yeah, and I mean, we always hear that we're a secret society, and strictly speaking, we don't believe that's true because we're easy to find. Our buildings are everywhere; they're well marked. A lot of us wear jewelry or rings or whatnot. So we're not really a secret society as much as we are a society with secrets. And really, there's two great secrets in Freemasonry. And what's really interesting is a lot of Masons themselves don't know what they joined either, so that's fine. But really, the two secrets that we have is the first is the confidentiality you have with a brother, the same as you would have with a therapist or a doctor or anyone else. So you basically, if I can share a family problem or a business problem with a brother, then it's my confidence that he will keep that a secret and between us in good confidence. And so that's expected. And that's one of the secrets in Freemasonry. The other is the relationship you have with divinity, with God or the divine. And the reason that we don't discuss that or talk about it in that sense is that we kind of believe everybody, their own experience of the divine is going to be unique to them. So I could be sitting next to somebody and we could be talking about the same divine energy, yet we're experiencing it in very different ways. And then also, perhaps by just putting it into language, it diminishes it. I think that we have to sort of see that divine as being greater than words, if you will. It's just an experience, and it's all very experiential. And even with the teachings of Masonry, it's very experiential. When people go through the degrees, not a lot is actually explained to them, so it's not really fleshed out in detail what all this stuff means. I think that it's almost like the Freemasonry has this philosophy that the teacher is irrelevant. In the sense that it's supposed to stimulate your curiosity. There are all these curious rituals and symbols. And if have it within you to learn, then you're going to be stimulated and you're going to take it upon yourself to start doing the research, and you're going to sort of find all this growth that happens with that. But if you don't really have that desire, there's no point in us telling you. So I think that removing the teacher, in a sense, is pretty interesting. And then the other thing I love about the ritual, one of my favorite parts in the third degree, is that as we move through the degrees, there's a Mason that is doing prayers for the candidate in each of the rituals. And then it gets to the very last part of the third degree, and there's a line that says, heretofore you've had someone to pray for you, now you have none, you must pray for yourself. And every time I hear that, I almost get chills, the idea that ultimately your salvation is up to you. We can only do so much, and now it's really up to you. And I absolutely love that. And again, you don't really see that in a lot of sort of spiritual religious organizations, that idea that, we're here to kind of assist, if you will, or support, but ultimately it's up to you. And I really, really always appreciate that part of our philosophy.
That's very Buddhist-like.
Well, I'll take your word for that because I'm not a Buddhist. So if you say so, sure, we'll go with that. Absolutely.
Well, most of the Buddhist philosophy believes that your own enlightenment is up to you and that you have to do the work. You have to meditate or do the practices or the mantras, and but you have your fellow sangha, people that are there with you, and you can do your practices together. So that idea of that putting into Masonry what you want makes you sort of a better Mason. I see the importance of that, but also one of the things I know that you wanted to do was to have more lectures on the symbolism, and because there wasn't really enough that was, there were books and everything, but there really wasn't enough talk at all about it.
Yeah, I thought it was important. But before we get into that, I noticed on our chat, I just want to say hi to Mamie Louise, because she goes way back with us to the early, early days when we were at the Bodhi Tree. And we love you and think of you all the time. And every time you cross my Facebook, I smile a little bit. So I'm glad you found us. And thank you for stopping in and saying hi. So just know that we love you to this day. So yeah, I felt that it was important. I think that I wanted to give people a sense that there is something more to it than just a silly ritual, and that there's a tremendous depth, a tremendous history to it. From an occult esoteric point of view, there's so much to it. And so really making people a little more aware of that, I thought was important. And I think that unfortunately Freemasonry got so successful after the wars, it became almost too much for its own good. And I think they got so busy making Masons that they lost a lot of that stuff, which was to its detriment. So at Sunset, we tried to kind of bring that back a little bit, to give people a better sense of that there is a lot more to it. But even then, I think you can only scratch the surface. And I think that people still have to kind of take that little beginning and then run with it. So I don't think that really changes that.
Now, we've talked about this in a couple other shows. There are some lodges that are not recognized by your Grand Lodge, but have some certainly history and merit to it. And one is the Co-Mason lodges, and I think there are couple different groups in LA that allow women and men to practice together. So what are your thoughts about some of these lodges maybe becoming more recognized, and also like women's Masonry? What are your thoughts about that? Since I know some people just think only men are Masons, but that has not been true for quite some time.
Yeah, there's a certainly a shift of consciousness, I think, between some of the younger and some of the older ones. Masonry was sort of a man's world. And a lot of the older folk still sort of think of it that way, I believe. But the younger guys, I think, are much more open to the idea of co-masonry and that women have a place in Freemasonry. And I think I very much support that. I think it's a really good thing. There is a sense of separate but equal in the sense that I think it's still nice to have a tendency for the men to have the ability to hang with other men that are good men and have that role model and so forth, and the women the same with other women. So maybe having it being separate but equal is maybe a better way to have it rather than mingled. In terms of, the experience, I think is the same. I think there are things that they do better than we do, and I think there are things we do better than they do. And I think some of the co-Masonic groups, that they read the ritual, they don't memorize it, and I think that you're doing yourself a disservice in the candidate by not committing it to memory. And I know when I was memorizing the ritual, not only are you learning the words and memorizing the words, but you gain a much deeper understanding of the philosophy at the same time, because you're spending that quality time with the ideas and kind of going over it and over it and over it as you're memorizing the ritual. So I think that when you just read it off a piece of paper, I think it's to your own detriment. In some ways, maybe their standards are higher. There are some Masonic groups that make their candidates wait a year between degrees. We don't do that. Maybe they make them do a little bit more research and so forth before they get their next degree. So I think maybe we've simplified that a little too much in our organization. So, but again, I think the experience is the same. And I know at Sunset Lodge, I just know talking to the women Masons that meet here that in some of the lodges, they don't get a warm reception, but here they always have. And so they always love being here because our Masons here are very accepting of the co-Masonry and the women Masons. Whereas, again, some of the other lodges are a little more conservative and they will rent the space to them, but they do it begrudgingly, which I think is a shame. But I think it's going to be the way of the future. I think that and I should talk, too, about the idea that Masonry is designed to evolve very slowly. It really wasn't that long ago that we actually recognized the Prince Hall lodges, which are the black lodges in the U.S. And, of course, our society was so segregated, so that Masonry was also segregated. And that's not really the Masonic teachings, that was American society at the time. And so back, a few decades ago, we finally recognized the Prince Hall Masonry and shared recognition in California. And at the time, there was the question, do you want to sort of come in under our Grand Lodge and form one entity? But it was their decision. They had their own history and traditions at that point, and they would rather be separate but equal. But I've gone to Prince Hall degrees. We've had Prince Hall Masons visit our lodge, and that's true of most states in the country, not all. There are about a dozen states that do not recognize the Prince Hall Masons still. And they claim it's all just organizational, that there's certain organizational issues that they have to resolve before recognition can be bestowed upon them and they can be accepted and embraced as brothers. And I have a little hard time buying that just because all 12 of them, the states that don't recognize them, are south of the Mason-Dixon line. So to me, again, that's a little suspect. But the rest of the states, we certainly have that now. And I think with women Masonry, it's going to be kind of the same. But again, if we were to suddenly admit Masons into my lodge, then our lodge would lose recognition from all the other lodges in the world. It's really designed that way so that no sort of somebody with an agenda or a fraction can suddenly, grab hold of it and twist and pervert it. It's a very laborious process to even make small changes in Masonry. So it gives you stability, but it certainly makes innovation a challenge, for sure.
So I wanted to go back to the first part of your comment about the memorization of the ritual, which I belong to the Order of the Eastern Star, which is sort of connected to Masonry, and you have to be married to or connected to a Mason to join. And we had to memorize not as much at all. And I have to say, it was very challenging and nerve-wracking for me because I'm not really comfortable as a performer, but I really, really got a lot out of it. And one of the things when you memorize something is, like Michael was saying, it just goes into your subconscious. So because you're running lines, and I think you do kind of think about it more organically, the lessons in the ritual. And I also think it helps with aging. If you work your mind, and memorization is supposed to help to keep your mind, really more useful.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And certainly one of the things we're looking at is how to benefit the members. And studies have shown over and over that if you memorize poetry or passages or music or all kinds of different things when you're doing crossword puzzles, or other puzzles. The people that do that a lot have a much lower rate of Alzheimer's and dementia as they get older. So I think that there is something about not just, the deeper appreciation of the philosophy, but by doing that, there is certainly a physiological benefit to doing things like that. So I think it is really healthy and good for you for sure. And even if you're not going to be a Mason, I think try and use your mind for gosh sakes. I think that if you don't, it atrophies, and I think you don't want that to happen. So you want to really, keep that mind active and keep it working.
So how has your lodge been handling the pandemic?
Well, much like the rest of the world, we've been sort of closed since March of 2020. We've been having our meetings by Zoom online like everybody else. We're fortunate in the sense that when it first happened, I thought, oh, this could be challenging because our lodge, like any other lodge, only has a limited amount of resources, and are a lot of our members going to lose their jobs and become destitute, and how are you going to handle that? And fortunately, that hasn't been the case. We've really had no real requests from any of our memberships for any help or relief financially, which I'm pleased and shocked a little bit that was the case. And so that's been a blessing for us in some respects. Not that we wouldn't have gone out of our way to help. We certainly would have. But it's definitely been a challenge in the sense. In some ways, it's been good in that we've connected with brothers that have moved across the country and so forth on our Zoom meetings that we don't get to see in lodge anymore. We're kind of getting ready to reopen the lodge to in-person meetings. In our case, in July is what we're aiming for, provided people have been vaccinated or that they've had a negative COVID test within a couple days. But again, they've been cautious. And again, a lot of our members are elderly. So I was really hoping, and I think that they've done that, the Grand Lodge, of being very conservative and reopening, because it's, as much as I miss the ritual and the fellowship and hanging out with all the guys, it's not worth killing somebody over. And so again, we've been very, very cautious about reopening our lodge. But those days are coming, thankfully. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
So when you look at Masonry as a whole, since you've been involved in it for, a couple decades, do you think it's growing in the world? And what is your vision for it yourself?
Well, I think there was a collapse, and I think that was just the bubble bursting. After the wars, there were a lot of people that wanted to continue some camaraderie and fellowship, so they joined things like Freemasonry and the Elks and the Knights of Columbus and all these different organizations in massive numbers, which I think created an artificial bubble. And of course, the Freemasonry expanded with that. They opened a lot of new lodges and everything else. And of course, that bubble, as these people started dying off, burst. And so there's been sort of a collapse of Freemasonry. And I think some of the leadership in Freemasonry saw that as a bad thing. I just saw it as a correction. I think that we're coming back to what I think were historic levels anyway. So I never was quite as freaked out about that. But there were certainly some lodges that ended up closing their doors and consolidating with other lodges as the membership shrank. Starting maybe 10 years ago, 15, I think there was a bit of a resurgence in it. And I think Hollywood had a lot to do that. We had National Treasure coming out and the Da Vinci Code and all these things. So it started to become kind of hip and cool again to be a Mason. And I think obviously as we went through the 70s and so forth, Masonry got lumped in with everything else as part of the establishment. And so I think, that anti-establishment movement didn't help. But I think now, again, it's kind of shifting, and we're getting back to having a much more active interest. And we're seeing a lot of the lodges actually growing and expanding, and even new lodges opening over the last 10 or 15 years. So there is a little bit of a resurgence. I kind of hope it doesn't become another bubble, because I'm not sure that that's healthy. And as I said, I think the danger in that kind of rapid growth is that you lose a lot of the substance. And I really kind of hope that doesn't happen. We're trying not to do that here for sure. But there definitely has been that renewed interest in the fraternity as a whole.
Do you think that technology can help Masonry?
No. I think the opposite, as a matter of fact. I think that there is something about the tradition itself, and I'm not always convinced innovation is a good idea. I think in America, there's always been that sort of dumbing down. They want to kind of go to one-day classes, and you just show up and you watch the degree and you become a Mason. And I've been very opposed to that, as our lodge has been actually. Because I think that it's about challenging people to step up a little bit is never a bad thing. And I think that there is it's kind of like the difference of, would I want to go to the theater or watch it on TV? And if I go to Hamilton in the theater, I'm going to get a lot more out of it than if I watch it on TV. So yes, the technology in a sense can make some things more accessible, but I think that this is a place to sort of get back to that really personal, physical connection with other people, and I'm not sure technology is necessarily good for that.
I did not realize that the idea of you could watch a degree and receive it was even being thrown around.
Yeah, that's been a thing that's come up now and again. Some states actually do that. There are a couple of states now that do that. So they'll have a big class with a whole bunch of people, and one person will do the degree. And the Scottish Rite degrees are done that way, and even the Royal Arch degrees are done that way, where they'll have a one-day class and only one candidate goes through it. And I've always felt that that was not a good idea. It certainly expedites things, but at the same time, I know going through the first three degrees and the initiations as I went through them, to have that actual experience of being the candidate and being in the ritual, boy, it's different. If I was just to sit on the sidelines and watch it, after you've had the experience, then great, you get a lot out of it and you see things. But to me, it would have deprived me of a lot of the specialness of the experience, and especially our third degree. There's such a profound impact of it from a ritual point of view. It's unlike anything I've really almost ever experienced in my life, I think. And unfortunately, I always say that the worst person to ask about Freemasonry is a Mason, because there's a lot of stuff we can't specifically talk about. But there is kind of a death and rebirth aspect to the third degree, and it's an incredibly profound, moving emotional experience. And I think if you're watching that on the sidelines, there's none. I mean, it just takes that away. And so I wish we would sort of come back a little bit more again to standards and not trying to dummy things down. And as I said, if you make it easy for people, yes, maybe a few more people join, but you're also not really challenging people to be their best and to step up. And I think that in our society, maybe it's time to start challenging people more rather than making it easier all the time.
Well, then it's more meaningful when they actually obtain it. They feel like they've accomplished something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you watch people that win a gold medal at the Olympics and they're crying like a baby because they understand what it took to get there. And if you just handed everyone at the door one, it wouldn't mean as much. So I agree. And I think that just, challenging, and then this doesn't just apply to Freemasonry, I think, and maybe something we can just apply to our own lives, the idea that maybe we shouldn't always be looking for ways to make things easier. Maybe we should be challenging ourselves to step up more and be more ambitious and work a little harder for bigger things and so forth, rather than just trying to find the easy path. And maybe there's something to be said for that. And I do think that when you've earned something, when you've really put that effort in and the time in, and, me to be master of the lodge, I understand how much ritual I had to friggin' memorize. It was pages, and it was a book. It was literally a book, word for word. And they would sit there and they would correct you when you were reciting it and say, no, you said that singular, it was supposed to be plural. So I mean, it's really a discipline. And to me, again, to be deprived of that, but it made me feel special, that I was able to be elected master of the lodge and I was able to do that, because it wasn't just something that could be handed to me. It's something that I had to really commit to and do the work to achieve. So again, it's just my philosophy. But again, the American thing is everyone should be president, and everyone should be. It's almost like a race to the bottom, in our society.
Well, it's really true, and I think part of it is connected to the speediness of life, and they think that, if it takes this long, no one's going to be interested. And what I have found for me personally is that by slowing down, it actually is really a good thing in this really fast society. So anything that gets you to slow down and feel and go within is really important. And it seems from all of other shows on different types of esoteric teachings, nothing happens quickly.
No, and I think that it really shouldn't happen quickly. I think that there's, like I said, something to be benefit. There's a benefit to making effort to achieve something, and I'm not really convinced quick and easy is good.
Now, you sort of talked about this a little bit, but maybe add a little more thoughts about what traditions would you like to see retained in Masonry, and where do you think they could innovate and change and become more flexible with the culture they're in?
Well, I guess that's a good question. What would I say to that? I think that I don't know if I really appreciate much in the way of innovation. There's a dignity to Masonry. I mean, we still wear tuxedos. The degrees are still formal in our society. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we don't want to go to jeans and T-shirts. So I don't know. I think that it's not really about innovation. I think the only real innovation to me, and again, this isn't going to happen in my lifetime, would be that I think that in the beginning there was this belief in society that you couldn't be a moral person and be an atheist. If you didn't believe in a higher power, then somehow you couldn't be a good person. And I think that now, obviously studies have shown that there's really no connection between the two. And so I think perhaps, again, moving away from that and somebody who maybe is a little bit of an atheist, if they still wanted to become a Mason, I think that might not be such a bad thing to remove ourselves a little bit from that thinking. But other than that, I think that there is something to be said for tradition. And I do think that there is a lot of amazing tradition in our lodges. And I'm not really sure I want to see, incredible innovation. Again, women Masons being more fully acknowledged and accepted, I think would be a good innovation. And I think that will eventually happen too. But again, as far as the ritual itself, it goes back hundreds of years, and I went through the same initiations that Washington went through, and Voltaire went through, and so forth. And so for me, again, there's something special about that. I'm not sure we should be innovating all of that away.
One of the ways in which I have perceived you talk about innovation, though, is how you present the lodge to the public, that you thought they had taken the word secrecy too seriously, and that you created public events that would draw people in, and then they could ask questions about Masonry very naturally. So that's one of the things I noticed that you, in the very beginning, wanted to do for your lodge, that people didn't even know sometimes there was a lodge here.
Yeah, well, I think the reason for that, again, clearly there's been a lot written about our ritual. There are books you can buy online. There are encyclopedias of Freemasonry with all the symbolism in it. So there's a tremendous amount that's been written about it. The secrecy aspect of itself is kind of maybe some of the specific words that are used in the ritual. But the overall philosophy, I don't think, is secret, and I don't think it was ever meant to be secret. So I think we can certainly talk about that. That's why I'd like to have Lon on to talk about that. But what I do think happened, and again, my theory again in the 1950s and 60s, when there was that huge explosion of Freemasonry, and Masons, really Masonry became kind of degree mills. It was just pumping people through and getting their rituals done and their initiations, and every week was just making more Masons. So it became that. And I think that because of the volume of people that were joining and going through, I believe that a lot of the stuff, like, there were lodges that used to talk about the symbolism. They used to talk about the history of the fraternity and even of their lodge. And I think that from a time crunch management point of view, a lot of that stuff got set aside, unfortunately. And so I think that honestly, there were a lot of Masons that joined Masonry. They went through the degrees. There was never any explanation or education about what some of the symbolism meant or anything else, or even the underlying philosophy of the fraternity. And so, and people don't like to feel too dumb. So when somebody would say to them, well, what is this Freemasonry thing about that you joined? They didn't know. They didn't have a clue. And so rather than look silly or stupid, they would say, well, I can't tell you. It's a secret. And so I really honestly believe that was a big part of it. And I think, again, that was to our detriment. So I think that to us to come back now to trying to reinstill all of that into the lodge. And one of the things I noticed again, and when we started a program, Salvatore Ambulando in Sunset Lodge, which kind of became a blueprint for a lot of what other lodges are doing in California now, the thing I looked at is all of the philosophy, everything that's supposed to be there is still contained within the ritual itself. So you use that as your blueprint, and you come back and say, okay, we should be talking about liberal arts and sciences. We should be talking about philosophy. We should be talking about spirituality. We should be talking about esoteric symbolism. It's all there, and it's really just a blueprint, and that's the way we took it, was that. And then my philosophy was always develop your talent within. So rather than bring outside experts, I try and encourage our own members to do some research and present a lecture, and as a way. And plus, I think it helped them. I think that the more that they go through and do the work, the better they develop also their knowledge. So that was kind of my philosophy, where a lot of other lodges like to invite in experts to tell you what you belong to. Why not challenge your own members, who are often very bright, to teach it themselves,
And yes, you have done that. And talk a little bit about Salvatore Ambulando. It really was in some ways even the seed for this show.
Yeah, it kind of was. And again, when I joined the lodge, as I said, there was about 4 guys keeping it going. And I said to them, look, I'm not going to promise you we're going to save the lodge, because they were talking about closing it. I said, but if it does fail, I will promise you it will be not for lack of effort on my part. I'll do everything I can to try and make this work. And because I think there's something here worth saving. But I said to them, I've got a lot of ideas and there are things I wanted to do. And a big part of that was getting back to the emphasis on the teachings themselves and the esoteric aspect of it. And Murray Cook, who I dearly love to this day, every time I see his portrait on the wall here, I tear up a little bit. One of the past years ago, but one of the most amazing people I've ever met. And it looked at me, he said, well, clearly whatever we're doing is not working. So you just go ahead and do whatever you want. He said, go for it. And he really believed that. And as we got well into it, he always continued to support new ideas and trying new things, which I thought for an older person was pretty cool. So one of the things I wanted to get back to was the philosophy and the symbolism. So we started this group, Salvatore Ambulando. It became a monthly sort of a philosophy club of Masons. And we invited in the general public too. And we would present on a host of topics, not even necessarily connected to Masonry. We did some very cool stuff. But each member would volunteer to do a lecture. And so that one of our members would step up and they would do research. And some of it was very esoteric. Some of it was history. Some of it was philosophy. Some of it was all kinds of different things. And I think it became such a rich part of the experience here in the culture. But it really shifted our consciousness in this lodge away from being just, doing degrees almost without thought to becoming much more esoterically inclined. And I think it started to create an identity for the lodge, which was kind of the goal. For me, I think that in order to sort of save the lodge and get it back on its feet, I would say to the members, let me ask you a question. Why should I join this lodge? What can you offer me that nobody else can or better than anybody else can? And because to me, you have to have a sense of identity and know who you are before you can sell that. And so we became known for being somewhat of an esoteric lodge and in a really positive way. So, and I think that really attracted a certain kind of people to us. And it's been to the betterment of the lodge as far as I'm concerned.
It was originally, I don't know if it is anymore, it was originally open to the other bodies, like Eastern Star members could also do lectures, because I did a couple of lectures, I remember, and it was very enjoyable. It was a very good chance to really get to know people in a different way, which is something that it seems like your lodge does try to have different kinds of events, from, just social events to philosophical, and that seems to be at least a helpful thing for any lodge.
Yeah, I think so. And again, we wanted to embrace the feminine in this lodge, which was the Eastern Star at that point. The Lady Masons weren't meeting here yet. But again, I would have no problem at all, having a Lady Mason, do a lecture. In fact, I think we did at one point on Freemasonry from their point of view or some Masonic topic. Because to me, being inclusive is a big part of who our lodge is. And so that was definitely very important to me, that they didn't feel lesser or not included, So yeah, absolutely.
So now that you've been involved in Masonry for as long as you have, and you've been a very active member, can you see any difference in who you are in terms of development before you were a Mason and after? Do you feel like it has impacted you somehow?
I think so. I don't know if it changed my character very much, and I'm not convinced that it could anyway. I'm a big believer that you are who you are, and that it's not going to make you a different person in that sense. What it did, though, was it gave me opportunities to do things that I may not have had the chance to do otherwise, which has benefited me in my life for sure. So, for example, as master and my installation ritual, which, by the way, every lodge has an installation ritual in January, normally December or January. It is a very Masonic ritual, and it's the one ritual that's open to the general public. So if you guys in the LA area, Santa Monica area, want to come to our installation and see a Masonic ritual, let me know and I'll hook you up, and you're more than welcome to come. Plus we have food and entertainment after, so it's a free meal too. So my mother said never turn down a free meal. So if you happen to be in the Santa Monica area come January and you want to go to an installation, a Masonic installation, you guys are more than welcome. But again, I had to give a speech in front of a room full of 60 people, and I've not done a lot of that. So for me, again, and to learn that skill of being able to stand in front of a group of people and address them and give a speech was hugely beneficial. So I got a lot out of that. Some of the administrative stuff in governing a lodge, I never dealt with, investments and all that good stuff. And then I think that the other thing is just, again, that support system, being able to be around people who are successful and, get advice from them and all that kind of stuff. To me, again, has been hugely beneficial. But I don't think it's so much change of character. I think it's about giving me an opportunity to experience and do things that I may not have had the chance to do otherwise.
It does seem like it gives you opportunities for leadership of different degrees.
Yeah, I think absolutely. But again, that's up to you. And it's like any other thing in the world, you're going to get out of it what you put into it. So yes, it gave me the opportunity for leadership, but I also stepped up to become a leader. And so I put in the work and I wanted to do it and so forth. There are other people that will go through the degrees and they'll pay their dues and you'll never see them again. And it's not really benefiting them a whole lot to do that, other than to say they belong. Sure, they'll still have some support and they'll still be recognized when they travel as a Mason. And if they're if their car breaks down, another Mason may probably help them out and so forth. But again, I don't think they're getting as much out of the experience. Whereas if you get involved, well, it's just like anything else. If you get involved, you're going to get so much more out of the experience. But that's a choice I made, that I really wanted to be involved and still involved in the lodge, because I'm now the secretary and I'm still the officers coach and I teach all the ritual to the new guys. And the officers coach is sort of the elder's elder, the guy that isn't really in charge and doesn't want to be in charge, but at the same time is there to sort of talk sense to the guy that is in charge when he's doing something dumb or help him with some advice. So for me, again, it's like anything else. As I said, you get out of it what you put into it. And I definitely put some things into this lodge too.
One of the things I wanted to mention, being married to a Mason, and one of the tenets, at least of, it seems like the Blue Lodges, is to help the families of Masons. And I think particularly in the early days, the widows, that from my experience, they seem to take that very seriously. And I personally have always felt pretty welcomed in the Blue Lodge.
Yeah, absolutely. We take an oath that we will help a fellow destitute brother Mason, his widows, wife, orphans, children. So it is that extended family. And the other thing I like about Freemasonry, and this is kind of in the ritual itself, it's kind of emphasized too, is that it has its priorities right. And by that it means that it says, first and foremost, it's your family and your career that matter, not Freemasonry. So that's where your first obligation is to take care of your family and your career. And then Masonry comes after that. So for me, I always thought that was wise. And I think Masonry itself is not, I guess we'll say, an egotistical organization in the sense that it wants to be the first thing in your life. It's more there to support the other things that are in your life. And to me, I think that's very healthy.
I think so too. So we're down to about 3 more minutes. Is there any sort of last little piece of advice or thoughts you'd like to share with us?
And not really so much, I don't think, other than visit a lodge if you're interested. Definitely, if you really want to see the ritual, as I said, the installation ceremonies in December and January, if there's a lodge near you, are completely worth doing. It is a secret society in a sense that our meetings are confidential, just like a board meeting or anything else, but it's not a secret society in the sense that you're not welcome. So, as I said, always search it out if you're interested. And the other thing, quickly, again, for people that might be interested, is that Masonry, one of our laws is that we're not allowed to solicit members. So we can't actually go out on a membership drive. People have to sort of come to us and be drawn to us. So if you're hoping that Masons are going to be at the shopping mall trying to sign you up the way Scientology is, that's not going to happen. But they will welcome you with open arms if you show up at a lodge. And if you do decide that you want to join a lodge and you're in an area like Los Angeles or San Francisco, where perhaps there are a number of lodges, please visit a bunch of them before you decide which one to join. Because in the end, it's not the building, it's the people that are going to make your experience. In some lodges, it's a bunch of guys that like to go to the ball game. Some lodges, it's guys that are much more esoteric. So find that lodge where you feel that there's a real kinship between you and the people. And even if it's a humbler building, if it's the right people, it's going to be a much better experience than a glorious building with people you don't really get along with or share things with. So when you have that opportunity, as I said, don't be afraid to visit other lodges. And unfortunately, if you're in a very small community, there may well only be one lodge. But as I said, in places like LA, definitely shop around. It should be a good fit for you as well.
I agree. And I totally encourage people to come to the installation of officers. I really enjoyed even now. It's really a very, very Masonic-like ritual, and it'll give you a taste of some of the way they do ritual. Before we close out the show, too, I did want to thank Darian and Mamie Louise. Hi, Mamie. We love you. And Sherry for joining the chat. I'm sorry we couldn't chat today because Michael usually does the chat, and I couldn't possibly do it and interview. So thank you, folks, for hanging out with us. I hope you enjoyed the show. And thank you, Michael, for all your great information.
Well, you're most welcome. It was really fun, and I'm going to try and close out the show now. So
all right.
It's all the way to you.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together, and have a magical week.